In this video, I'm going to show you how a sealed system works. So in order to do that, I went and spent $575 and put in a lot of man hours to make this little contraption right here for you. So pretty much all it is a mock-up of a real sealed system. So we have our compressor, we have our condenser, we have a filter dryer, which I know we have two here. That's the only way I can make this system work and be able to split it up. But in a normal refrigerator, you would only have one filter dryer. We got a lower evaporator and we got an upper evaporator. So as most of you may know, or maybe you don't know, that a lot of modern day refrigerators now have dual evaporator systems. So I wanted to set this up as a dual evaporator system so you can see exactly how the system works. So just a really quick rundown of how the refrigeration cycle works. So the compressor pumps refrigerant into, well, through the system, but the flow is it pumps refrigerant into the condenser. The condenser would normally have a fan here. Obviously, this coil would have a fan, that coil would have a fan, that coil would have a fan, and the fan motor pulls air over them. But this compressor pumps into this condenser. The condenser it gets warm, because what happens is in a refrigeration cycle, you're not adding cool to a box, you are removing heat from a box. And that heat eventually ends up in the condenser, so the fan motor will pull air over the condenser and push that warmer air into the house, and it'll cool down this liquid, and then it goes through the system again. So it goes from the compressor to the condenser, leaves the condenser, comes through some tubing, probably a Yoder loop, which goes through the cavity of the refrigerator itself, and then it comes out and it goes into a filter dryer. The filter dryer is designed to catch any kind of impurities, any kind of moisture, anything that you don't want in the system. That's what the filter dryer is designed to do. It'll leave the filter dryer and come through a cap tube out of the bottom of the filter dryer, and it goes all the way up to the inlet of either evaporator, whether it's lower, whether it's upper. And then that whole cycle starts back over again, suction line all the way back to the suction port of the compressor, and it starts it all over again. Again, like I said, the fan motors will be pulling air over this coil, removing the heat as it comes over the coil, and then that heated refrigerant will come back down, come into the condenser, fan motor will cool it off, starts all over again. So these two coils are my way of adding a three-way valve. Now in a dual evaporator system, you would have a three-way valve, and that three-way valve switches or diverts the flow of refrigerant to either lower evaporator or upper evaporator. In this case, this is what I have to use because I don't have a three-way valve to make that work. So then this valve and this valve, I am able to, of course this wouldn't be in a refrigerator, this is just something I added, because what I can do is I can divert the refrigerant flow into this set of coils, which you also would not find in a normal refrigerator. I just added it to it, and I can trap it there to simulate a low charge system. So that's what I did that for. This valve right here, I'm able to stop the refrigerant flow to simulate a restricted system, because I want you to see those two different scenarios, because that is two of the main things that you're going to see with the refrigeration cycles or sealed systems. You're going to see a low charge and you're going to see a restricted system. So you want to know, what does it really look like on the gauges whenever you see that type of system. So just to let you know, I am hooked up to the filter dryer for the lower evaporator. So we're going to start off with the upper evaporator, that way we can see the frost pattern on that and all that good stuff. But we're going to do all our tests on the lower evaporator, so that way we can actually see high side pressures and low side pressures. So I got my gauges hooked up here, and right now we're at 59 psi on the low side and 60 psi on the high side. So it's pretty much neutralized. Let me plug this system in real quick. I got to do this one-handed. Okay. All right, so the compressor is now on. It is pumping refrigerant. So that 60 psi is now coming down. So don't worry about this number right now, because we're not on that evaporator. We're on upper evaporator. So don't worry about this number. But right now that low side is coming down. It's pulling that number down, which you would expect to see in a normal sealed system. So the refrigerant is now being pumped into the condenser. So this condenser is already getting nice and warm. So it's getting very warm, which we want it to, because it's going to dissipate that heat. And now we are getting a good frost pattern on our upper evaporator. So it's already coming all the way through this upper evaporator. So the entire evaporator is now has a very good frost pattern on it, as you can see there. Hopefully you can see that. So we're starting to settle in at about 4 psi. So that's pretty good, you know, for a system like this. So everything's getting really cold, really warm down here. Like I said, you would have a fan that would be pulling air over that. All right. So that's the upper evaporator. Okay. So now let's go ahead and switch over to the lower evaporator. You know, see, we're still right at about 4 psi. That's probably where this one, where the upper evaporator will settle in at about 4 psi. So let's go ahead and switch over to the lower evaporator. Okay, we're going to close off the flow to the upper evaporator really quick. We'll let that pump down just a little bit as if the three-way valve is doing it. And now we're going to open up our flow to the lower evaporator. Okay? So our numbers are, you know, they're going all over the place because they have to settle in and equalize. But now you can see our high side number because we're hooked up. We're hooked up to the filter dryer for our lower evaporator. So now we're actually reading pressure coming through the filter dryer on the high side, which is good. So we have, well, so far we've got 135 psi on the high side and about, you know, a little over 8 psi on the low side, and that's going to keep on equalizing because it hasn't, you know, the refrigerant cycle hasn't kind of ran its course yet. But again, you know, the upper evaporator is still a little bit cold just because it had the refrigerant flowing through it. But now if I just touch it with my fingers, that frost kind of goes away. But now we got a really good frost pattern on the lower evaporator. So it's coming all the way up already, this lower evaporator. So in the sealed system world and the refrigeration world, we call this a frost pattern. And that frost pattern is really, really good. That's what we want to see on a good working refrigerator. Of course, we got a really good warm coil, so that's good. Everything's working really good. Good frost pattern. Okay, so this is where we're starting to settle in at. About, you know, almost 3 psi on the high side or low side. Well, that's coming down still. And about 148 psi on the high side. And we're still coming down on the low side. So as it's sending more refrigerant through this evaporator, and it's cooling down, those numbers are going to come down. That low side is going to come down, but you can see it's starting to slow down. So I think that's where we're going to settle at. You know, we'll settle in between, you know, 0 and 1 psi. And over here, we're looks like we're settling in about 149 psi. So that is what's normal. That's some normal readings on a regular refrigerator. About 0 to 10 psi. Of course, LGs, their linear compressors run sometimes in the high teens. That's okay too. But that's some really good numbers for a sealed system. So again, we came down just a little further, about a half psi and about 149 on the high side. So now let's do some simulation here. Let's pretend like we have a restriction, okay? So let's go ahead and close off this valve. So what we just did, we've stopped the flow of refrigerant from coming out of the evaporator, which is a very common situation. It's a very common scenario whenever you're dealing with you know, sealed systems, is you'll get a restricted cap tube or whatever, so it stops the flow of refrigerant. So what's happening already, the compressor, don't know if you can hear that on camera, but the compressor has gotten really quiet. The reason why is because it's in a deep vacuum. The condenser coil is starting to cool off now because it's not pumping any more refrigerant. And down here, we have went into a crazy deep vacuum. We went into 750 microns of a vacuum. And the reason why is because we're not pumping any refrigerant anymore. We got a blockage right here. Well, in this case, it's right here. Of course, other cases it'd probably be on the cap tube or something. But we've got a blockage, so we got a restricted flow of refrigerant, so it's not pumping anything. Or it doesn't have anything to pump. So now, here's a little trick on how you can tell whether a system is actually restricted or whether the system is actually just low on refrigerant. All you have to do is just unplug the refrigerator. The compressor will stop pumping, so then the pressure should equalize. But whenever you are fully restricted, that pressure takes forever to equalize. It goes up extremely slowly. If you are only low on refrigerant, that number will equalize fairly quickly. So let me reach over here, unplug the refrigerator. Okay. I just unplugged the refrigerator. The compressor has stopped. That number should be drastically going up, but it's not. As a matter of fact, it's barely moving. So that lets me know that I have a restriction. I've got a really, really good restriction, actually. So that's how you could know if you are restricted or if you are just low on refrigerant. So let me plug it back in. Hopefully the head pressure is not too high. Okay, so I've got the compressor back on. So we're going to go ahead and open up our valve to get our refrigerant flowing again. All right. We'll let that settle in for just a second. As you can see, our pressures are coming, they're back up, and they're trying to get back to normal because we got refrigerant flowing again. So that's what a restriction looks like. Deep vacuum, and if you unplug the refrigerator and the compressor shuts down, equalization is very, very slowly, almost none. You know, sometimes it just won't equalize at all. So that's a little trick there to know if it's actually low on refrigerant or if it is restricted. And we're going to do it again. We're going to do it again in just a second. I'm just going to give this just a second to kind of run through this evaporator a little bit. It's already coming back up. We're already getting a good frost pattern again now that we've got refrigerant flowing again. Frost pattern is getting really good. So let's just give that just about 30 seconds to go ahead and equalize again. And then we're going to trap all the refrigerant and pretty much take it out of the system, trap it over here, and simulate a low charge system. Okay, so it looks like our PSI down there on the low side is 2. We're at 2 PSI, so we're looking good. We got a really good frost pattern. So now let's capture this refrigerant. Let's shut off here and open here. Okay. We'll let this run for about 30 seconds, and all that's doing is I'm diverting the refrigerant into this coil back here to trap it. Like I said, you wouldn't have this on a normal refrigerator. I've just done this just to do a little simulation as if you were low on refrigerant. We'll just let that go for 10 more seconds or so. Okay, that should be good enough. Maybe there'll be some left in the system. We want something. So we're going to close that back off so we got the refrigerant trapped. We're going to open back up to our lower evaporator. So now the little bit of refrigerant that is in the system is starting to come through again. So we'll give that a second to kind of equalize and do what it's going to do. But let's go ahead and take some observations. Right now, I can see that we are much cooler on the condenser. So we got a little bit of good warm heat right here at the very inlet, which I would expect that because there is a little bit of refrigerant. But as you get to the second pass and the third pass and so on, it just gets worse and worse and worse. So we're definitely not discharging heat like we were before. There is a little bit of a frost pattern, if you can see that. There's a tiny bit of a frost pattern, but see, I don't know if you see it on camera, but it's not even enough to stick. Just the heat from my fingers getting on the coil is just causing that thing to go up. Look at there, it's just going up. So that lets you know that, I mean, yeah, there's some refrigerant in the system, but it's not enough. That's not enough to cool this box. We're definitely not getting a full frost pattern. It's not strong at all, the little bit of a frost that we did get. So that'll never cool the box like it's supposed to. Now let's look at the pressures. Again, we have come down into a really deep vacuum, and it's because the compressor is on and it's pumping strong, but there's no gas in the system. So now let's take a look and let's see what happens whenever we unplug the refrigerator. And we know it's not restricted, we just know that we're low on gas. So now let me unplug it. Okay, I just unplugged it. The compressor has stopped. Now watch that. You see that? It jumped drastically. and that number is coming back really fast. And it's going to equalize, you know, to whatever point it can with a little bit of refrigerant that's in there. But we had the same exact vacuum as we did restricted. You know, a lot of times it's not always that deep of a vacuum. Sometimes it's only like 16 inches, 18 inches or whatever. But I guess I really got a lot of the refrigerant out of the system. So it must have had barely any left. So we were able to achieve a really strong vacuum, 700 and something microns. That is very strong. But the difference between the restriction earlier and the low charge is whenever we unplug it and the compressor stops, that number goes up drastically. So that is a very good tip for you to use out in the field, trying to diagnose whether you're just low on charge or whether it's a restriction. That's a very good tip for you. But this is how a refrigeration cycle works. I hope it helped you. If you have any questions or if you want me to do any other simulations, just leave them down in the comments below, and I'll try to get back out here and I'll try to do some other things. Or if you have any questions, just ask them and I'll answer them. But I hope this helps.